Welcome to a place where love is not just a feeling, but a journey that takes you from silence to surrender, from longing glances to the kind of passion that feels eternal. Here, every story begins with the quiet ache of unspoken desire, where hearts recognize each other long before the body dares to move. It is in the laughter, the shared words, the tender pauses, where walls fall and souls are stripped bare. And when restraint finally shatters, when fear dissolves, love flows free, tender, consuming, unforgettable. Here, passion is not lust alone, but love made flesh, where every kiss is a vow and every touch becomes truth. This is where real stories are told, raw and unfiltered, stories that remind us what it means to truly love, deeply and without fear. Stay, listen, and let your heart be carried into the fire of forever. It began so quietly that it almost felt like a secret the world was not supposed to notice. There were no declarations, no sudden sparks, just a slow and steady pull, like an unseen thread tying two souls closer each day. Every time his eyes lingered, every time laughter slipped between us, something inside grew restless. It wasn't hunger in the way the world often speaks of it. It was softer, deeper, the kind that leaves an ache long before the body ever dares to move. There were moments when the silence between us said more than words ever could. Standing in the same room, just a few steps apart, the air seemed to thicken with everything unspoken. A brush of the hand that might have seemed accidental stayed burning on the skin far longer than it should. The warmth of his presence made the heart beat with a rhythm that felt almost dangerous, as if it knew something the mind was still refusing to accept. Every glance became its own conversation. His eyes searched with a quiet intensity, as though trying to read secrets that had been hidden too carefully. And yet, instead of fear, there was comfort. To be seen that way, fully, without judgment, without pretense, was both terrifying and beautiful. It left a longing that couldn't be named, because once named, it would have to be faced. The ache deepened with time. Simple moments, like sitting across from him and watching the way his lips curved when he smiled, became unbearable. Words would get lost in the throat, because what wanted to be said was far too dangerous, far too raw. It wasn't about confessing love. It was about surrendering to a truth that had been building like a storm in the distance. And storms, once they arrive, never leave things untouched. The memory of his touch, even when accidental, became something to carry through sleepless nights. A hand brushing past in passing, fingers grazing when something was handed over. Every contact was electric, too short, too fleeting. The body would betray itself, aching for more while pretending nothing had changed. But everything had changed. The quiet had become louder than any words, filling every moment with a tension that could no longer be ignored. And yet there was restraint, a restraint so strong it hurt. Every heartbeat screamed for closeness, but fear of breaking what already existed kept the distance intact. It was a dance of waiting, a silent game where each move mattered more than the last. Every night ended with the same question: how long could this longing remain hidden before it consumed everything? The truth is, longing doesn't stay quiet forever. It leaks into the smallest gestures, the way the voice softens when speaking, the way the eyes linger too long, the way laughter feels like intimacy itself. Even when no words are spoken, the soul begins to confess what the mouth refuses to say. And once the soul confesses, there is no turning back. There were moments when time seemed to pause, when the closeness between us felt almost unbearable. Sitting together in silence, the nearness itself became an unspoken promise. The heart would race, the skin would tremble with awareness, and yet neither of us moved. That restraint, that aching pause before surrender, was its own kind of fire, a slow burn that threatened to set everything ablaze with just one step closer. The longing grew into something sacred. It was no longer about desire alone, but about recognition, about knowing that someone had touched the deepest part of the soul without ever laying a hand on it. That kind of connection is rare, and it doesn't fade. It lingers, intensifies, and waits for the moment when fear will finally give way to truth. And so the nights stretched long, filled with restless thoughts and the memory of his eyes, his voice, his presence. Every small moment carried the weight of everything unsaid, everything restrained. The body ached, but it was the heart that carried the heaviest longing, the kind of longing that whispers over and over again that no matter how long it takes, surrender is inevitable. Because when two souls burn for each other in silence, the fire only grows hotter, and no amount of denial can keep it from breaking free. Would you like me to continue expanding this into the next keynote, the soul before the body, with the same style and depth, about 1,000 words, so it flows as a complete unfolding story? It didn't start with touch. It started with words that felt different, words that reached places no one else had ever dared to go. The kind of words that didn't skim the surface but dug deep, unafraid of the shadows that most avoid. Each conversation pulled away another layer, exposing pieces of a soul that had long been hidden. There was no rush, no performance, only a natural unraveling, as though trust had been waiting silently for this very moment. The laughter came easily, but it wasn't the shallow kind. It was the laughter that heals, the kind that slips past the lips and settles into the chest, leaving warmth behind. Every shared smile carried something unspoken, something that grew stronger with each day. There was no pretending, no need to hide flaws or fears. For the first time, being seen fully didn't feel like a risk, it felt like freedom. There were nights when words flowed endlessly, when hours disappeared without notice, and yet it never felt enough. Every story shared became a bridge, every silence filled with an understanding so rare it felt otherworldly. It wasn't about trying to impress, it wasn't about charm, it was about being real, and in that rawness, something powerful was born. The way he listened was different. He didn't just hear, he absorbed. Every detail, every emotion carried in the tone, every pause heavy with meaning. He caught it all, and in his presence, nothing felt wasted. To be understood so completely, without having to explain, felt like the deepest kind of intimacy. The body wasn't needed to feel bare. The soul was already undressed. Walls that had been carefully built over years began to crumble. Defenses that once felt like survival now seemed unnecessary. With him, there was no judgment, no fear of being too much or not enough. He didn't just see the polished fragments meant for the world. He saw the broken edges, the messy truths, and chose to stay. That choice alone felt more intimate than any touch could have been. Every word exchanged deepened the bond, weaving threads of connection that bound tighter with each passing day. It was as though the soul had been waiting for this recognition, this mirror in another human being. A mirror that didn't distort or criticize, but reflected back light that had long been forgotten. To be seen that way was both overwhelming and healing. There was a rhythm to it, a cadence that felt timeless. Conversations turned into a sanctuary where the outside world couldn't intrude. Within that space, everything was safe. Dreams, fears, even the silence, especially the silence, for silence with him didn't feel empty. It felt full, as if the quiet itself was another language only we could speak. There were moments when laughter turned into softness, when eyes met and refused to look away. In those stares, there was no need for explanation. The eyes spoke of recognition, of belonging, of a connection too deep to ever be mistaken for coincidence. It was as if two souls had been circling each other in the dark for years and finally collided, knowing immediately they were meant to meet. The body longed, yes, but the heart had already surrendered. Long before touch, love had already been written across every word, every glance, every shared silence. It was not lust that drove this connection, but something purer, something that made even the idea of intimacy feel sacred. And so the soul gave itself away first. Piece by piece it unfolded, offering secrets, wounds, and hopes with a trust that couldn't be explained. To surrender in that way, without fear, was the truest intimacy of all. Because when the soul has already been claimed, the body can only follow. Would you like me to now expand into the next keynote, the surrender, with the same tone and depth, another 1,000 words, so the story keeps building in sequence? There comes a moment when all the walls built so carefully begin to tremble, when silence can no longer hold the weight of everything unspoken. It doesn't happen with planning or calculation. It comes like a wave, sudden and unstoppable, born from all the nights of restraint, all the days of hidden glances, all the ache that has been carried in secret. It arrives without warning, and yet it feels as though the soul had been waiting for it forever. The air between us shifted that night. It wasn't a word or a gesture that made it change, but something deeper, something invisible that finally broke free. The eyes lingered longer than they should have, breaths came quicker, and the quiet grew heavy with what could no longer be denied. Every inch of distance seemed unbearable, and every second of waiting felt like a cruelty too sharp to endure. The first touch was not rushed. It was trembling, hesitant, as if asking permission from a language only the heart could understand. Fingers brushed against skin and lingered there, both of us caught in the gravity of that single moment. Time seemed to fold in on itself, leaving only the sound of beating hearts echoing in the stillness. The fear that had always shadowed us began to dissolve, replaced by a certainty that this was no accident. It was meant, it was written, it was inevitable. The kiss came like a breaking dam. All the restraint, all the nights of longing, all the fear of stepping too far, it shattered in an instant. Lips pressed together, not in haste, but in surrender. A surrender so deep it felt like breathing for the very first time. Every inch of hesitation melted. Every fear was drowned beneath the tide of passion rising between us. It wasn't wild at first. It was tender, searching, tasting the truth we had been denying for too long. But tenderness has its own fire, and soon that fire consumed us. Every touch became bolder, every kiss deeper, as though years of hunger had finally been allowed to feast. Hands explored not with greed, but with reverence, mapping out what had already been known by the soul. There was no thought of consequences, no lingering doubt, only presence, only the pure, raw truth of what it felt like to finally give in. The body moved as if it had always belonged here, as if every curve, every breath, every heartbeat was meant to be met by his. It was passion, yes, but more than that, it was recognition. The body recognizing the one it had been made to fit, the soul finally breathing through the flesh, the sound of his voice, the warmth of his breath, the way his touch made the world vanish. Every piece of it felt eternal. It wasn't just desire. It was devotion wrapped in heat, love wrapped in urgency, eternity condensed into a single night. Every kiss was a promise, every embrace a vow, every whispered word a reminder that this was more than passion. This was truth. The surrender was not just physical. It was emotional, spiritual. It was laying bare the most vulnerable parts, allowing them to be held, cherished, and adored. It was trusting another soul with everything, with every scar, every secret, every fragile corner of the heart. And in that surrender, there was no fear, only freedom. The night unfolded like a confession written in fire, slow and consuming, tender and fierce, delicate yet unstoppable. The body quivered with every touch, but the heart was steady, certain that this was not fleeting. This was the moment that would define everything, the night that would be remembered not for the flames, but for the way love had finally been allowed to speak without restraint. And as passion deepened, so did the silence that followed each breath. A silence not of emptiness but of completion. Nothing needed to be explained, nothing needed to be said. The surrender itself was enough, because when love is finally allowed to flow without fear, it consumes everything in its path. And once surrendered, there is no going back. It is said that when love finally takes shape in the body, it no longer feels like desire alone. It feels like truth wearing skin. That night, every barrier had already been stripped away. Words had done their work, laughter had carved its path, and trust had broken through the defenses that once felt unshakable. What remained was raw, pure, undeniable love, and when it finally touched flesh, it was not lust consuming us, but love revealing itself in its most human form. Every kiss carried weight, not the weight of hunger, but of devotion. Lips pressed together with a reverence that spoke louder than any vow. They lingered, not rushing, not desperate, but steady, as though sealing a promise that neither time nor distance could erase. Each kiss whispered, "I am here, I am yours, I am not leaving." The hands that traced along trembling skin did not grope, they adored. Each movement was slow, deliberate, a language that said, "You are sacred." Every curve, every shiver, every breath became an offering, and in return was met with tenderness so deep it almost hurt. It was not about taking, it was about giving every piece of the self to the one who had already claimed the soul long before the body surrendered. The warmth of his touch carried more than sensation. It carried recognition. It was as if the body knew, deep within its marrow, that it had been crafted for this connection. The way he held, the way he breathed against the skin, the way his eyes never looked away it, made even the smallest moment feel infinite. Time was no longer measured in minutes or hours, but in heartbeats, in the press of lips, in the sound of whispered breaths in the quiet. The passion that followed was not wild chaos, but a rhythm, a harmony that felt timeless. Bodies moved together, as though guided by something greater, as though they had been dancing this dance for eternity without ever realizing it. Each motion was not just physical, it was spiritual. It was love made flesh, love speaking through touch what words could never fully capture. There was fire, yes, but even the fire was tender, flames that warmed, not burned. A heat that did not consume to destroy, but to purify, to make whole. With every embrace, with every breath shared between parted lips, the body and soul aligned in a way that felt eternal. It was more than union, it was recognition, it was fulfillment, it was completion. The night carried a stillness between the passion, moments where silence said more than movement. Eyes locked, breathing ragged, hearts pounding, and yet no words were needed. The gaze itself became sacred, as though through it, vows were spoken, promises sealed. Every glance declared what the mouth could not. This is love, this is forever, this is truth. Even in the intensity of desire, there was gentleness, the kind of gentleness that says, "You are safe here, you are cherished here, you are loved beyond measure here." That gentleness wrapped itself around every moment, making even the fiercest passion tender, even the deepest longing sacred. The body, in its vulnerability, became a temple of trust. To give it, fully and without hesitation, was the greatest act of surrender. To receive it with reverence was the greatest act of love, and in that sacred exchange, two lives became bound in a way that could not be undone. When love is made flesh, it is not just an act, it is a covenant. It is every kiss turning into a vow, every touch becoming truth, every heartbeat echoing the eternal promise that this love is not of the world alone. It belongs to something greater. And as the night stretched long, with breathless whispers and trembling embraces, the truth became undeniable. This was not simply passion, nor merely desire. This was the soul writing its story across the body, carving it into memory, sealing it into eternity. Because when love finally finds its home in flesh, it ceases to be a longing or a dream. It becomes real, it becomes eternal, it becomes everything. If this story touched your heart, let it remind you that love is more than words. It is the journey from longing to surrender, from soul to flesh, from silence to forever. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss another story that carries you deeper into the truth of love. Until next time, keep believing in the fire that waits beyond fear.